Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're here with Antonia Angress. Say
Hi.
hello. Am I pronouncing your name right, by the way?
Yes, you are.
Okay, wonderful. All right, we'll just give everyone a minute or two to settle in, but in the meantime, I can introduce our wonderful guest. So Antonia was born in Los Angeles and raised in San Jose, Costa Rica. She is a graduate of Brown University and the University of Minnesota MFA program, where she was a Winifred Fiction Fellow and a College of Liberal Arts Fellow. She now lives in Minneapolis with her husband, and Sirens and Muses is her first novel. So thank you so much for being with us here,
So,
Antonia.
thank you so much for having me. I was saying this before the recording started, but I've been following Sapph-Lit since before my book came out, and I'm just really honored to have it featured on this
That's
platform.
so wild to me. It's just like a pinch me moment for sure. But I have so many questions and let's get into it. For everyone who's listening, if you have a question for Antonia at any point during the conversation, drop it in the chat and I will ask at the end, all of them together. So yeah, congratulations on your publishing debut. Can you tell us a little bit about what the experience has been like for you?
Yeah, it's been a emotional roller coaster. Overall, it's been really, really positive, and I've just been kind of floored by the response to the book. I've been getting, messages from total strangers, and that's just like the dream when you're a writer, to put work out into the world that people are really moved by and that they feel, compelled to reach out to you and tell you about it. There is also an element of like fear and vulnerability that is sometimes not really talked about. I think, especially when writers have, a public face, there's this sort of aspect of the publication experience that is sort of, really, really vulnerable and that people don't always talk about. So navigating that has been hard sometimes. But in general, I'm really, really grateful that I get to share my book to a wide audience, and I'm really grateful to have them respond so positively to it.
That's amazing. Your responses make me think, has releasing your book in any way mirrored the crit experience that you write about with Lisa?
I mean, yes and no. There's, certainly I've not had the experience yet of like getting tagged in a bad review, like on social media, which has happened to friends of mine. And which, by the way, if you disliked a book, it's fine. You should talk about it, but don't tag the author, because it's like tapping them on the shoulder and being like, "Hey, I really hate it." It's different in the sense that I can choose to engage or not, right? I can, like, right now I have Goodreads blocked on all my devices. But I suppose if I wanted to, I could, choose to dip in and see what people are saying about it. In the sense that once you put a book out into the world, it's open for criticism, and like that's what a review is, right? It's a critical engagement with the book. And I think most of all, I'm grateful that the critical response has been largely positive, and I'm also just grateful to get a critical response. Period. That's an honor. I always have to tell myself, like, my publicist sends me all the reviews, and sometimes they're not 100% positive. Sometimes there's, something that the reviewer didn't like. And I always have to remind myself that it's an honor to have a critical engagement with my work at all.
Yeah, that's a really good way to reframe it for sure. So you open this book with, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Pausanias's description.
I'm not 100% sure about how it's pronounced. I think it's either Pausanias or Pausanias.
We'll go with that, whichever one tickles your fancy. What made you choose that quote, and how does it, relate to the title of the novel for you?
So the title was not actually the title until fairly late in the publication process. One of the things that I didn't realize until I went through the process of publishing a book is that sometimes your publisher will want to change your title. So when I sold this book, I sold it, the title was originally Bowerbird. And if you've read the book, you'll understand why that was the title. The bowerbird pretty important.
Yeah.
Birds are important in the novel, and the bowerbird in particular is important. And so my publisher thought that the book needed a different title, that bowerbird was too quiet. So my agent and my editor and I spent a couple of months basically just emailing each other lists of titles, and most of them are really bad.
What do you think was like the worst one that was suggested?
Let's see, I think I remember like blearily, like in the middle of the night, emailing my agent being like, what about Muse? And she wrote back like, that's a band.
That's a no from me.
Yeah, let's not.
Yeah.
It's a band associated primarily with Twilight. Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, thank you.
Love.
So the three of us eventually settled on Sirens and Muses, and there were already, some pretty strong thematic echoes of that title. It almost felt like a title that had just been like waiting in the text for us to discover it. But I did do a pass on just my very last edit before I turned the manuscript in. I did a pass where I added a few other references to sirens in particular, because muses are, pretty important element in the novel. And then the epigraph was one of the last elements that fell into place. I went searching. I knew about the myth about the sirens and the muses, and how in ancient Greek myth they're classical rivals, and in particular they're artistic rivals. But when I stumbled across this excerpt from Description of Greece, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This feels like something that's just been waiting for my book.
Yeah, no, that's so serendipitous. It felt like you started with it instead of ended with it. So very, very meant to be. The other thing with the book that is so just visceral and seems so meant to be is, of course, the artistic references. And I've seen on Instagram, and we've shared in our group in Sapph-Lit, like all of the different photographs. Like I'm literally staring at the one that you included in the book of the crane, or let me just pull it down. This one.
Yes, that Kayla Zeke painting.
Yes, it's beautiful, and immediately, really enhanced the reading experience for me. And I was an art history student, and my mom was an art history student as well, and works in an art museum. So this was truly a joy for me to read. It was so visual. Your language is so painterly. And I'd love for you to walk us through some of the artistic inspirations and tell us about that research process. And I'm also so curious, like, I know your husband is an artist, but have you painted yourself?
So I am very much not a visual person. I actually, in graduate
school, so surprising.
My mom's an artist. My mom is a painter and a sculptor. So I grew up around art and around art making and around, art books and, art history. I remember, in our house growing up, my mom had this whole bookshelf just full of art books. And then of course she had her art practice. So it was something that I definitely grew up around. And then, as you mentioned, my partner is also an artist. He's a painter primarily, although he also works in other mediums. I went to college right next door to the Rhode Island School of Design, which is a old famous art school. And while I was there, two things happened. I became really fascinated with the art students next door. I thought they were so cool, so much cooler than me, and they seemed to be having this really intense college experience. And I remember distinctly thinking to myself, oh, that would be a really good setting for a novel. And the other thing that happened was I started working when I was 19 or 20. I started working as a figure drawing model. That was one of my primary sources of income in college. And I did it in part because it paid really well. It paid, like, at the time, it paid twice as much as any like on-campus job that I could get. And I also thought, I was 19, and I thought, oh, this is a really romantic thing to do.
Romanticize your life.
Oh, totally. I was really into romanticizing my life at the time, but I actually found it to be a really, really interesting and enriching experience to to be a figure drawing model for all kinds of people. So I modeled for, formal art classes and, young students. And I also modeled just for drawing groups that met, in the evening. And people from all walks of life would come and draw me. And I found that really fascinating. I would walk around, during breaks, I would walk around and look at people's drawings of me. And it was sort of this way of, seeing myself through the prism of all these strangers' gazes. And then at the same time, I was also, I met my partner when we were around the same time. We were in college together. And he was putting me in a lot of his work. He was drawing me, and I was ending up in a lot of paintings. If you walk around our house now, you can play like Spot the Antonia and like the paintings on the walls.
That's so cute.
So I was also having this experience of like being, in a sense, being somebody's muse. And I had, like weird, like my inner college feminist, I think, was pretty like ambivalent about the idea. It's like, oh, I know what happens to muses. Muses are passive. Muses get discarded. But I became just really fascinated by sort of how other people can feed into your art, not only in visual art, but in literature as well. So all those sort of themes and ideas and experiences kind of cross-pollinated and fed into this novel, which I started writing right after college. So I graduated from college.
While.
I wrote, it took me 7 years to write. So I started it when I was in my early 20s, and I'm almost 32 now. So this book took me the bulk of my 20s to write. But then in terms of the actual artists who are referenced throughout it, a lot of them are artists that I have a personal fascination with. I have a personal fascination with Egon Schiele, who made the Wally, in part because he died very young. He was one of those just like really precocious boy geniuses, and he died, I think, in his early to mid 20s of the Spanish flu, which of course as a teenager I thought was terribly romantic.
Very Edward Cullen.
Yeah. And he's from Vienna. My grandmother was Viennese, and she, my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, so she was from Vienna, and then she had to leave when she was very young. And all her life, she had this sort of fraught relationship with Vienna and with sort of the literary and artistic scene there. And so I grew up with this idea of Vienna as almost this ancestral land that had rejected, because my family's Jewish, that had rejected my family. And I recently visited for the first time in my life this past spring. Vienna named a plaza after my grandmother. Reparations.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
And I went to the Egon Schiele Museum. It's not called the Egon Schiele Museum. It's called the Leopold Museum.
Okay.
And that was, like an incredible experience to, connect with this artist that I had this lifelong fascination with.
That's incredible. What is the name of the plaza in Vienna after your grandmother?
It's called Ruth Kluger Platz.
Okay, I'm gonna Google this after. Wow. So you got to go to Vienna and like I don't know if Wally's in the museum, but did you get to like
He is in the museum.
So you got to see it before the book was released then?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so special. Yeah. I love that. And one of the parts about the novel that's also really unique to it, besides like, getting really specific within the art world, is you chose to set it in a time period in, recent history that is very fraught, and something that, a lot of people are referencing again now that we're kind of entering into another recession. So what made you choose Occupy Wall Street to be a movement to examine with this lens of the art world? And I mean, it sounds like you might have gone to college around the same time. I'm not really great at math, but like, was this something that you experienced as well, close to RISD?
Yes. So I went to college. I started college in 2009 and I graduated in 2013. So I went to college during peak Occupy Wall Street. And I remember finding it, at the time, it felt all encompassing. It felt it felt like a moment of like we were on the precipice of a really huge change. And obviously it did and didn't happen. The movement fizzled. I think Occupy had a profound effect on leftist politics and like the progressive movement in the US. So I do think that Occupy has a legacy that, we see now. But I said it at that time because that's when I was in college. And remember, when I started writing this book, this was not that far back. I started writing this book in 2013, 2014. So it was fairly recent at the time. And I think Occupy really resonated with me because it encapsulated a lot of the anxieties that I had and that my friends all had, this feeling that we'd been promised all these things and then the rug got yanked out from under us. And sort of this feeling of like, oh shit, the future's really bleak and we're kind of screwed. And obviously too, all the conversations about inequality that arose out of Occupy. And I think, what was interesting to me about it, just through the prism of being at a really elite college, was sort of seeing all the ways that like inequality in class was really present on campus, but the way that no one really wanted to talk about it. And I think that's probably changed since then. This was almost a decade. It is a decade ago. Oh my God, I'm old. I think people now are more class aware and, more open about talking about those things. But I just remember, being in college and having a lot of the experiences that Lisa has in the book, just realizing someone's really, really wealthy because I'm sitting behind them and I'm watching them order hundreds of dollars worth of, clothes in lecture.
I mean, I went to NYU and I graduated in 2019. So like right before the pandemic hit. So it's kind of like a parallel experience in a way where like the rug is literally pulled out from under you and there's a different kind of uncertainty. But one of my best friends talks about this experience a lot. She was sitting next to this girl in lecture and she's on Stuart Weitzman's website and adds like 3 pairs of shoes into a cart and then checks out within like 30 seconds. And she was like, I cannot imagine having that kind of like carelessness about spending. And that was like a transformative experience for her. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there was a lot of that for me in college of going, making a new friend and realizing, a few weeks into the friendship, oh, this person's the
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but my buzzer is ringing and that's New York. So I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry about that. We're good.
Oh, no worries.
Please continue.
I think what I was saying was just having the experience of like meeting someone new and then realizing that, they're the child of someone famous or they're incredibly wealthy. And to me, that felt, in a lot of ways, it felt really frustrating that there was a way of just this pressure to just leave class at the door, especially in the context of like a creative writing workshop, right? Because I think art and art making is hugely informed by class. And that's part of what I wanted to get at in this novel, the way that, our socioeconomic backgrounds profoundly affect the kind of work that we can make. I think too, and I play this up sort of for comedic effect in the novel, but one of the like really funny hypocrisies to me about going to a really elite college during Occupy was watching the Occupy movement on campus, and I think some people felt really, really deeply invested in it and had personal investment in it, but for a lot of people it's sort of performative, and there is sort of an exquisite irony of camping out on the campus of a school.
NYU burned those have scarred me for life, absolutely. And I feel like we get a bit of that with Preston, and what you're talking about with like the sending of the email, and Louisa thinking for just like a really brief moment that she can stay in school. That was the most heartbreaking part of the book for me, because I was so excited for her and I like fully believed that it was real, and then the next page I was like, God damn it. So no, Preston for me is like that. Okay. That all of the Sapph-Lites really didn't like Preston. We were shitting on Preston in the group chat. And I think it's such a testament to your writing that we hated him so much, because he's so well written. And I feel like you could only hate a character that deeply if they're like very fleshed out in that way. So I say this with love, but he is a very deplorable Bernie bro-esque performative feminist, like just so he can get pussy. And I'd love to know why you think Karina stayed with him for so long. Because the way that I read it, he's kind of like her compet personified.
Sorry, say that again.
Her compet, like her compulsory heterosexuality personified.
I think that's part of it. I think part of what's going on in that dynamic is that she knows that he likes her more than she likes him, and that's like a safe, that's safe for her. That's power, right? That's power. And I think, and again, like this is where sort of like the compulsory heterosexuality comes in. I think it's easier for her to manage that power dynamic than it is for her to manage the power dynamic of someone with like Louisa, who she feels, I think, much more vulnerable around, and who in a sense she wants to be. I think that's part of what makes the dynamic between Louisa and Karina so sticky, is that like they're really attracted to each other. There's also a sense in which they want to be each other. And I think she feels none of that towards Preston. So it's a lot simpler for her to be with him.
I mean, it's like the classic beginning of bisexual like understanding, at least it was in my experience, where you're like, do I want to be this girl or do I want to be with this girl? But being with her means that I actually have to be vulnerable and like show who I am. And that's terrifying, because if a woman doesn't like me, there must be something wrong with me deep in my soul. But if a man doesn't like me, that's just because he's a stupid man. And I can just, be a performative little manic pixie dream girl. And like, that's very easy. So this is very relatable for me personally.
And that's like exactly, my experience with coming to terms with my bisexuality. It's funny, I found my old like diary from when I was like 11 years old, and I'm reading through it, and I had this really intense friendship with this other girl. And basically my entire diary is about this other girl. And truly it seems like I can't decide if I like if I want to be her.
I think that diary needs to make its way into your next novel in some way, because that's so relatable, like that very intense female friendship where you're like, I don't know what's going on here. Why am I jealous of literally everything that she's doing with anyone else?
And I remember too, around this time I had a, I think it's different now, because queer representation is much more visible in the media. But when I was growing up, it literally did not occur to me that you could be bi. Like, and part of this was being, growing up in a conservative place, right? Growing up in a really Catholic environment. But I distinctly remember around 11 or 12, like feeling attracted to women, to, girls, and also, just older women, and feeling like, oh God, I must be a lesbian. And then
like it has to be one or the other. It
has to be one or the other. Like I can't like both. Like it's not that I don't think I ever had the thought of I can't like both. It just literally did not occur to me. And so I think too, another sort of aspect of compulsory heterosexuality that I was trying to explore in this book is that when you're in a straight passing relationship as a queer person, which I am, I married my college boyfriend, and we have a really strong marriage, but there's a way in which there are scripts to follow, right? It's, it's what you're talking about, like the compulsory heterosexuality. There are scripts, there is a role that is very easy to fall into
Absolutely.
if you just don't think about it. Um, and and it's easy and it's comfortable. And I think that's part of what's going on with Karina too. It is
Yeah.
easy for her to be the girlfriend
Yeah.
of a guy, and it's not as easy for her to be the girlfriend of this girl that she really likes.
Yeah. Um, I relate to that so much. Which is why, Bi Visibility Week and Bi Visibility Day are so, so important. Um, and I'd love to hear about Robert as well, because one Sapph-Lit pointed out that they're kind of mirror images of each other, Robert and Preston, in many ways. They're both somewhat jaded, very naturally talented in very different ways, of course. And they have these kind of like inflated egos, yet are still seeking relevance in the art world. And in the end, it kind of seems like they flip places, where Robert was once what Preston was protesting. He then is, at the Guggenheim with all of these organizers and kind of integrating himself into the Occupy movement. So what do you make of their relationship to one another, especially with the ending of the book?
Well, I think there's something similar going on with them that there is between Luisa and Karina. And by that, I don't think that they're both straight men,
Yeah.
but I think there is a sense in which they are each other, or they are versions of each other. There's a way in which Preston is a younger version of Robert, and there's a way in which there's a future universe in which Robert grows into, I mean, Preston grows into Robert. And so I think they recognize that in each other. They see each other in each other, and that is both, there's some grudging admiration there,
Yeah.
and there's also a lot of fear and hostility because they see the worst of themselves in each other.
Yeah.
Um, but and I should say too that they're both, all of the characters in this book do, shitty things sometimes. And I think the men do shittier things because we live in a society that allows men to get away with shittier things. But I think that as a writer, I spent a lot of time with these characters, and I have some love for them and some affection for
Yeah,
them. I
of
think I
course.
have to. Given, I think you have to love your characters in order to spend that long with them. And I think for both of them, that a lot of their behavior comes from a place of pain, and it comes from a place of living in a society that does not allow them many outlets to express that pain.
Yeah. Toxic masculinity running rampant as per usual. No, and I definitely like grew to like not love, but like respect and enjoy Robert so much, especially as he, got his little like I don't know, mentee, I guess. And Adrian, I think his name was.
Mhm.
I thought that relationship was very, very sweet. And I love books that have these kinds of different perspectives. I think it's like really adds to like juicy drama in a way to understand how people see different events and how they make of them from, their own backgrounds. So do you have like a favorite POV to write? Which one was most enjoyable to flesh out? Were there characters that you struggled to, write about?
Um, I loved all of them in different ways. I think, interestingly, the trickiest one for me is Luisa, and Luisa is definitely, of all the characters, she's probably the most relatable. And given just reader feedback that I've gotten, and reactions from readers, she's the one that people seem to connect with the most, and that makes sense. She's a reader stand-in, right? Because she's an outsider in this world and everybody else is an insider. So she's sort of, taking the place of the reader in the novel. But I had a lot of trouble writing her. All the other characters came to me not easily, but fairly smoothly. And Luisa was hard, I think, because she's she's a more passive character than the others. And passive characters in general are trickier for me to write. Um, but I had a hard time figuring out what her art looked like.
Mhm.
With all the other characters, it was pretty easy. I was like, yeah, this is what this character would make. But with Louisa, I really struggled to figure out what her art was going to look like. And until I stumbled across Kayla Zeke's work, I really, really had no idea what this girl made. Um,
Yeah.
and so coming across this, the work of this artist that I really deeply admired, was sort of this creative breakthrough in the process of writing the novel. Um, I had this moment of like I walked into her show and I was like, oh, this is what this character makes. It
And
was one of
it sounds like you had like the breakthrough that Louisa had because she was struggling herself with like what her artistic voice was and what it looked like. And until she kind of found her muse,
Mhm.
and like pushed past what, was kind of expected of her being from Louisiana, like she was kind of lost. So it kind of sounds like you mirrored her
Yeah.
a little bit.
I mean, there's a lot in this novel that I think there's a meta aspect to. Like a
Yeah.
lot of the anxieties and the ideas are anxieties and ideas that
Yeah.
I had over over
Yeah,
the
I mean,
course.
as a portrait model, you were also Karina in a
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that experience form your writing of Karina?
Um, so so the scene where she first poses for Louisa, a lot of that was just I drew directly from my own experience
Yeah.
of being someone's model. So a lot of that is just like I'm gonna put myself back to what this felt like when I
Yeah.
was 19, 20 years old. Um, I think, for her, there's a way in which it it allows being Louisa's model sort of allows her to love herself in a way that she kind of felt incapable of before. She's a very talented and, very, very privileged, but she's kind of emotionally sort of shut off from herself. She's not someone who has had experienced a lot of love in her life.
Yeah.
And I think the experience of having someone just look at her very, very, very closely is something that she has never really had before. And I think that sort of breaks open something in her that
And it's so gay. It's amazing. So a lot of what Louisa battles is, that kind of need for external validation. And one of the opening scenes during a crit, you write, how was it possible to love something so much when you were alone with it, only to hate it as soon as other people saw it? And then when Ines and Louisa are doing the Bowerbird photo shoot, which is one of my favorite scenes in the book, and Ines is, getting her in the mindset of the bowerbird and saying, you've worked so passionately, so obsessively, and now all that's left for you to wait is to wait for someone to validate your work. It might be that you've done it all for nothing. It might be that your bower seduces no one, but you're too compelled by the blue to care. And I annotated that last passage with the words Louisa's relationship to art. And I like that scene was just kind of a really, really telling for me as a reader. And I'd love to know, like, this big kind of overarching question for me was, is it possible as an artist or an author or someone who makes work to put it out there for the world to critique? Like, is it possible to overcome that need for validation? And is that like, is overcoming that necessary to, enjoy it in a way? Like I'm currently battling with this stuff as I'm like doing more like, book club stuff. It's really weird to, create things for people. So I'd love to know your perspective on it.
Yeah, that's hard. I think the relationship with art that Louisa has at the end of the novel, which I won't spoil, in case not everyone has gotten to the end. Um, that's the relationship with art that I really aspire to have.
Yeah.
I have this mantra above my desk that I stole from Annie Hartnett, who wrote Unlikely Animals, and it says, "The work is the reward, everything else is frosting." So this is what I really, the kind of relationship that I want to have with my work, where
Yeah.
I'm doing it because I love it, because it's the only thing I want to do and I've ever wanted to do. And anything that comes of it, any money or accolades or, you know, recognition, is just, the cherry on top. That's what I want. I will not pretend that that's easy, that's the
Yeah.
relationship that I have all the time with my work. Like, obviously, I worked really hard to get this book published because I wanted people to read it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so hard to navigate. I think in particular because we live in such a capitalist society, and everything is, everything is monetized, right? And I have a mortgage, and I need to buy, groceries. And part of making money from your work involves getting that external validation, getting people to think, yes, I will exchange money for this piece of art. Um, I really struggle with that. I don't know that I have a clear answer, and
Will
I hope,
anyone ever have an
yeah,
answer?
I mean,
No,
I hope
it's
as I get older
yeah.
and write more books that will change. I have a mentor from grad school, Charles Baxter, who talks about this a lot, about how you have to rein in the ego,
Yeah.
over the long term, because otherwise, envy will just eat you alive. And that's something I think about him a lot, and about how he, over the course of his life, he's in his 70s now, has managed to set that part of himself aside. It's
Yeah.
what I aspire to.
Yeah, especially, part of being in a capitalist society is being in an individualist society and assigning your personal sense of self-worth to what you put out into the world and how you contribute to the world. And especially how you receive praise and money in return. So disentangling that is, I feel like, a lifetime struggle. So I mean, it's very comforting to know that it's not a feeling that you're alone in as, someone who makes things.
Yeah, no, I think every creative person feels that at some point. And if they say they don't, either
You're lying.
they're lying, or they have reached a level of enlightenment that
Yeah,
that
that
I
I'm not at, and I probably will never be at. And
probably.
like, I'm really happy for you, but that's not my journey. So this is kind of a silly question, but I don't know if she's on the call. My friend and fellow Sapph-Lit, Nikki, was texting me this morning, and she was like, so at the beginning of chapter 21, there is a character that you name Taylor Swift. And you joked that she got a Taylor Swift CD for her birthday, which is hilarious. Are you a Swiftie? The girlies want to know.
I do. I love Taylor Swift, but that I absolutely adore her. And I have a friend who is really into, the theory that Taylor is actually gay. Um,
Taylor, yes.
yes. I don't subscribe to it. In my fantasy, she's bi, because
Yeah.
the world.
I think she's bi, personally. I feel like Karlie Kloss and her had that intense bisexual friendship. And I think that there are many songs about Karlie Kloss in her discography. That's the TikTok rabbit holes that I have
Oh
been
yeah.
in are devastating. Are you
But
excited?
yes, I am a Swiftie. But actually, that little nugget in the book, that came from someone real. My partner has a friend who for a while was dating someone named Taylor Swift. Like,
That poor woman. That
so
poor
I put
woman.
it in the book. I
I
just
love
remember
that.
finding it so funny.
Yeah,
I remember meeting her and being like, "Oh, you look nothing like Taylor Swift."
I mean, that's like one of those things where it's like you really like add every single experience that
Yeah.
you have into like this little trash pile in the back of your brain that you just like collect and pick from to like put in stories. I love that so much. Are you excited for Midnights?
Yes. Oh, yes.
I'm
And I also have to say this was on literary Twitter that her album cover looks like a book cover.
It does. It's giving. It's giving this. No, I got like the same friend said that I look like the cover of Sirens and Muses.
I
She was
think
like,
you do. I think you do. Have you tried taking a
I did, but I was like kind of intoxicated at the time and home alone. So like I'm actually gonna try next time. But this, I have like those color changing lights and I put them on like turquoise. And I was like, ooh, I'm a muse. Hee hee ha ha. I will report back on my official findings when I have a little help. But speaking of songs, one of my favorite questions to ask all the authors I interview is if there is like a book or a song that characters in a relationship would recommend or give to one another, what would they be? So with Karina and Louisa, if they were like to make each other read a book or listen to a song, do you know what that would be? And it doesn't have to be from 2011. It can be like any song or any book.
That's a good question. So I made a playlist for this book. My publisher had me put together a playlist that's
Yes. Oh, it was in the book club kit you sent me.
in the book club kit. Yeah. There's a band, and I think this song was on the playlist. So there's a band called from Louisiana, from the part of Louisiana that Louisa is from, which is also I live there too. That's part of why the Louisiana element came into the book, because that's a part of the country I've spent a lot of time in. It's a band called Sweet Crude, which I love, and they have a song called Ultimatum, and everyone should go listen to it. This is that's definitely a song that I imagine Louisa giving to Karina sort of in the moment, in the middle of the book, when they have sort of that rupture.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really get into Mitski until after I was mostly done with the novel, but a lot of Mitski songs to me are very like extremely
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, Marie in the chat absolutely agrees. Mitski's so true. Yeah. What Taylor album do you think is this book?
Okay, I think it depends on the character. Like I think Karina is maybe more Reputation era.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think Louisa feels more folklore to me.
Yeah, I was gonna say Folklore or Evermore for her because it's very like woodland nature vibes. Okay, so I watched your conversation with our mutual friend Rachel Krantz.
I love Rachel.
I love Rachel, who's the author of Open, and I, got to interview last month, and I adored her book so much. And I would love to hear about. And you also were interviewed by Jen Winston recently.
I also love Jen.
Who we love, Greedy. Both of them are bisexual icons, and it is Bi Awareness Week. And in the beginning of this conversation, you kind of spoke a little bit about how there is this surge in queer representation and specifically bisexual representation. So do you have any like thoughts on the surge of bisexual content in the literary world right now? Like, why do you think it's happening? How are you feeling about it, being a part of it yourself? And what makes bisexual content different to you than like other queer content?
Well, I think again, I can only speak for myself, right? I am but one bi woman. I think bisexuality exists in this sort of liminal space, in this sort of gray area that straightness and gayness don't, right? There's this sense of, not being quite, you're not quite gay, excuse me, but you're not straight either, right? You exist in sort of this liminal space. And I think that a lot of really fantastic, some of the really fantastic bisexual literature that are coming out really investigate that, that experience, the sort of the confusion of it, but also the freedom of it. So like obviously Rachel does that really well and open. Greedy by Jen Winston is a book that I wish I'd had growing up. I,
Same.
that's a book that I wish I could give to myself at 13, 14, because it would have clarified so many things for me. I mean, I think the surge in queer, and I think in particular like sexually fluid literature, so bisexual, pansexual literature, I wonder if it's driven just by Gen Z, honestly, and sort of like the changing attitudes around sexuality and sexual fluidity and gender presentation as well. I really, I'm a millennial. I really admire Gen Z, and I really admire the way that you guys, you're Gen Z. Are you?
I was born in 1997. I'm 25,
okay.
so I'm like
elder.
I'm a grandma Gen Z and or baby millennial. I'm kind of like, in between. I'm the bisexual version of the generations. Like kind of in between two spaces.
Yeah. And I think I mean I really admire young people now, and I'm really, in a way, I'm really envious. I wish that the culture had been at that place when I was young, and I think I would have saved myself a lot of grief and a lot of just angst if the conversation had been where it is now when I was a teenager. But yeah, I think a lot of the bisexual books that are coming out now, another really good one is Acceptance by Emmy Neatfeld. She's a bi writer, and her memoir is about a lot more than that. It's sort of a hard memoir to give an elevator pitch for, because it's about many, many different things. But one of the things that she talks about is how she knew very early on that she was bi, and she grew up in this evangelical family, and that in a way, in her family, being bi was worse than being gay, because it implied a choice. And it also implied multiple sexual partners. And so she talks about bisexuality in the context of these very, evangelical repressive environments, and, sort of coming to terms with it. And she also writes about, something that really resonated with me, which is that when you're bi and you end up in a committed relationship with a cis man, which she is, she ended up marrying a man, how that part of you gets erased, and how it's, you have to actively find ways to keep that part of yourself alive and visible.
Yeah, that's, one of the things that I strive to do with this book club is show that queerness and bisexuality, and however you identify gender even, is more than just, who you date, who you sleep with. It extends into all areas of your life. Like, this book club is an expression of my queerness. And I also have to remind myself, because I'm queer, every relationship that I enter will be queer. And, bi people have been invisible for such a long time. And that's why Visibility Week is so, so important. Because we're still constantly getting invalidated within the community.
And I think what you were just touching on now, the idea of community and every relationship as an expression of queerness, for me, queer friendship has just been life-saving.
Makes me emotional. Yeah, my best friend and platonic life partner is also bisexual, and I can't put into words how much queer friendships have meant to me. That is 100% an expression of sexuality.
Yeah. And I did an interview or a book talk with Jen just last week, Jen Winston, who wrote Greedy, and we got a question about bi culture, what is bi culture?
Yes.
So we were just going, but that's another thing. It's not just about relationships; it's about culture and shared cultural signifiers.
Yeah.
And I will always maintain that Rachel Weisz and Brandon Fraser in The Mummy are bi culture.
Thank you so much for saying that. The Mummy is my sexual awakening. Every single
Same.
person in that movie is so hot. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. What do you want readers to get out of this story? Having to do with, art, sexuality, or academia? Like, what is something that people you hope take away?
Well, first and foremost, I hope that this book is just a pleasure. Like for me, reading reading is first and foremost just a pleasurable activity. There's my favorite feeling in the world is getting so absorbed into a book that I don't want to do anything else, and I neglect, my work, and I neglect my pets and my friends and my family, and I just want to be in the book. And then afterwards, when the book is over, I'm thinking about the characters, and I'm thinking about them as though they're real people, and I'm having conversations with them in my head. That to me is just the apex of the reading experience, and that's what I want to create for people. So first and foremost, I hope that it's an escape from reality, and that you just tip headfirst into this world. But beyond that, I'm in the creative piece. I think I really hope to sort of hammer home this idea that there's so many ways to be an artist, and there's no way is more valid than another, and the art is important, like even if beyond like that it can and should exist outside of capitalism, and that it's important for its own sake, and that any creative endeavor is sacred in a way, and that you should never feel guilty for pursuing it. In terms of the queer piece, I really tried to write the bisexual novel that I wanted to see in the world. And so I hope that other queer people, other bi women in particular, feel seen by it.
Yeah.
And that
You definitely did on all 3 points, as for me as a reader, and I know so many other Sapph-Lities feel that way. So, I mean, thank you for writing it, like, first and
oh
foremost. So spoiler alert, we're going to talk about the ending. So everyone's saying they felt seen. That's so
that's looking at the
cute.
chat. That's where
um,
my heart.
And for everyone who's listening, we're about to get to the rapid fire round. So put your questions for Antonia in the chat, and we will definitely ask her at the end. So ending, spoiler alert, it's very uncertain. We don't know if Karina comes home with Louisa, and we don't know how they're going to be together. It's kind of like, I'll get back to you on that. What do you envision for them in the future?
So I deliberately put an ambiguous ending into the novel because I just really wanted, I don't like tidy endings, and I wanted the reader to sort of come to their own conclusions.
Yeah.
But I think realistically, I don't see Karina um coming down to live with her in Louisiana. I mean, maybe she does, like maybe she'll take on a life of her own and surprise me. But I think ultimately theirs is one of those like first loves that don't survive into their later adulthood, but that are, formative.
Yeah.
In a lot of different ways. I think they did a lot of good for each other in their lives. I don't feel certain that they stay together.
Yeah, I've asked this question to several authors who kind of also have the ambiguous ending. One that's coming to mind is A World Between by Emily Hashimoto, which is a wonderful, wonderful novel. And I asked her, and she kind of said the same thing. She was like, I don't think they're going to be together. Like, that was their transformative first love experience. And we're kind of raised in this society that tells us like happily ever after is like very easily attainable, and like once you meet someone that you like fall in love with, you're
Mhm.
together with them forever. And like that embracing of the uncertainty is, you know, productive in a way. As a hopeless romantic Libra myself, I'm like, I will embrace the uncertainty.
Wait, are you a Libra?
I am a
I'm a
Libra.
Libra too.
Oh my God, when's your birthday?
October 3rd.
I'm October 13th. Oh,
Amazing.
we love an October Libra. Our season is upon us, so happy Libra season. Marie in the chat is October 17th. So Libras are
Hey,
about.
October
I mean,
babies.
this is a Libra book. I'm sorry, it is. It's like aesthetic and, you know, art and romance. It's 100% a bisexual Libra novel. Okay, we're gonna do the rapid fire round. What are you currently reading?
I just started Strangers to Ourselves by Rachel Aviv, who's a writer that I really love. She was a writer who she went to Brown and she came and spoke to the English department when I was 18, and I've been following her ever since. She's a nonfiction writer. She writes about psychiatry and mental illness, and it's a really fascinating book about various people's experiences with psychiatry. It's interesting actually, because I don't read a ton of nonfiction. So this is kind of unusual for me, but recently I read a couple of my favorite books from this year are All This Could Be Different by Sarah Duncombe Matthews, which is also sapphic. It's a beautiful queer coming of age story. Highly, highly recommend. And it just got longlisted for the National Book Award, which is very exciting.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Totally deserved. And Sarah's great too.
I am adding to my list, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That would be a really great, Sapph-Lit pick. And I also just started the new Emily St. John Mandel books, Sea of Tranquility. Yeah, which I really love. And let's see what else. What other really fantastic books have I read? Well, again, Acceptance by Emmy Neatfeld is another one of my favorites this year, also nonfiction. I've been getting really into Sarah Waters recently, who writes
Yes. Tipping
queer,
the Velvet.
Tipping the Velvet, Fingersmith.
Yeah.
She writes like queer historical fiction set in like Victorian.
Classic.
It's so good, so immersive. It's just like if you want to read a book that just feels like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, you should read Sarah Waters.
These are all fantastic recommendations, and thank you to everyone in the chat who's writing these down, and please put them in Geneva as well so we can all read them together. What is a book? Well, I feel like you kind of already answered this. Do you have a book that you recommend to everyone? Like for me, it's The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. I'm like, if you haven't read this book, read it right now. Like put everything down and finish it.
Yes, I do. It's The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth, which I read in my early 20s. I wish I'd had it as a teenage girl. It's that kind of just beautiful queer coming of age novel set in Montana in the 90s. I reread it every year.
Have you read her newest release, Plain Bad Heroines?
Yes, I loved it.
We read it as a club. It was so good.
Oh, it's so good. And it also, like, a lot of it takes place in Rhode Island, where I went to college. There was a lot of like Providence stuff. And I was like, I think she lives in Providence. Yeah,
I think she does. I'm from Boston, so I love a New England story. Okay, do you have a book that's being released soon that you're excited to read?
Let me think. There is a book that I blurbed actually that's coming out in February, called End Papers, but it's by Jennifer Savrin Kelly. It's also a bisexual novel that I recommend. But in terms of books that I haven't read yet that are coming out soon, I love Rebecca Makkai, who wrote The Great Believers. She has a boarding school murder mystery coming out next year called I think it's called I Have a Few Questions for You.
That's hot.
And I cannot wait.
You had me at boarding school,
yeah.
but then you really hooked me in with murder mystery. Incredible. Did you take up an unusual quarantine activity?
Oh, this is probably not unusual. I got really into Great British Bake Off.
Incredible. No, that's perfect.
To the point where my partner and I would just we'd at dinner would be like, it's not proofed right. It's
as a soggy bottom.
Yeah, it's soggy bottom.
Yeah,
we got very obnoxious about it. Yeah.
I'm so excited. It's being released every single week, so I can't like binge it in one day, which I don't like, but it's good so far. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Ooh, good question. Maybe Frida Kahlo.
Good answer. Do you have a favorite class that you took at university?
Yes, the first art history class I ever took was life-changing. It's a class that directly influenced this novel because it was taught by a woman named Rebecca Moholt, who actually died the year after I took it. So I never got to, she died of breast cancer. So I never got to like tell her that she had an enormous influence on me. But the way she talked about art made it feel human and approachable and alive in a way that I had never experienced before. And when I was writing this novel, I was very explicitly trying to channel that like humanness and warmth that she had sort of injected into this field that I had grown up around, but had always felt, somewhat intimidated by.
Yeah, I love that. I have an art history professor like that. His name is Kenneth Silver, and he curates at the Guggenheim, like very typical like NYU sort of professor, and he like just brought this energy and like you said, humanness to all of the lectures, and he made it so interesting and like told so many backstories about the artists and the art and like the time period and the context that it was like they jumped off the screen to me. Yeah, everyone should take an art history class is the moral of this story.
Yes, artists are wild. Like the stories behind, they are insane. So messy, so much drama.
So much drama. Okay, do you have a favorite movie and TV show that has bisexual representation?
Broad City is my favorite bi TV show at the moment. I'm rewatching it at the moment.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen it? Oh my god! Oh, you have to watch it.
How many people say they're shocked when I say I haven't seen it? So it's on my list. I just don't really.
Oh my god!
Reality TV.
It is truly just amazing. It holds up too. Like I'm watching it now, about 10 years since it came out, and I'm just like, wow, this holds up. This is truly amazing. In terms of, let's see, movies. Another show that I think, and I'm talking about TV shows because I watch more TV than movies. But another show that is very bisexual is What We Do in the Shadows.
Not either.
Oh, it's so good, so funny.
Adding to my list.
Yes, they're all, and it's funny because it's never like explicitly stated, but the movie's really good too. But the movie's not the movie's not as queer as the TV show. The TV show, like all the vampires, it's a mockumentary about vampires who live on Staten Island.
Why haven't I seen this? Okay. Sold. You said vampires, you said gay, you said Staten Island.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have a favorite bisexual celebrity or like content creator to follow on social media besides Haley Jacobson, Jen Winston, and Rachel Krantz?
Let's see. Gosh, you took away like all my bi content. Let's see. Anna Paquin is queer, and I'm gonna do a cop out and say Alana Glazer.
Yep, love
the icon.
Okay, we are done with the rapid fire round, so let's go to the chat. Emma asks, what is your current favorite Taylor Swift song?
Hmm. Well, I've been listening to this is not a song, but like the two albums that I've been listening to just nonstop on repeat to the point where they've just completely blended together are Evermore and Folklore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna DM you this playlist on Spotify if you haven't heard of it. It's Folklore and Evermore, but played in a very specific order where it's like played like a karaoke, like jukebox
Mm,
musical, like Mamma Mia style, and it like tells a whole story that they like line out. So I'm gonna send that to you.
okay.
It's very good. Okay, Maddie says, I notice a lot of time descriptions are two words, like quite frequently throughout the book, you utilize two different descriptive words for art or how someone felt. Was that a conscious choice or was it something that just happened?
I think that's one of my writerly ticks. I've had actually professors point that out, that I tend to do like two adjectives with a comma between them. Often I think it's a way to sort of get at contradictory feelings. Um,
Mm.
or contradictory aspects of a single object or whatever. But yeah, I think that's just a writerly tick that you are not the first to notice.
Kirsten asks, any hints on what you're writing now, novel or otherwise?
Yes, I'm working on another novel. It's going to be very different, in that it's also sort of set at a school, but it's about a teacher. It's about an elementary school Spanish teacher, which is a job that I used to have.
Oh my
That was my
God.
first job out of college. I had a whole previous life where I taught elementary school. Um,
So cute.
and and it is an adult novel, to be clear. It's not a kid's book. But the protagonist is also bisexual. And it's still early phases, but what I can say is that it's a love story. And it's a story about teaching and caregiving, but also about language and untranslatability.
I'm sold. We will have you back when it is released. Absolutely. That sounds amazing. I cannot wait to read it. Jennifer says, I'm curious about the detail of Karina reading Tamora Pierce during her formative years.
Oh, that was another thing that came straight from my childhood. I loved Tamora Pierce, especially the Song of the Lioness Quartet. And in retrospect, that was probably my first exposure to like gender bending and like gender fluidity, because that features a protagonist who, you know, um, pretends to be a man for most of the book. I also found them very, very sexy. So yeah, that came straight from my own life.
I love that. I love that so much. That was the last of our community questions. Antonia, thank you so much for being here. I don't want to stop talking to you. You are so interesting and well-spoken, and I have just so much enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored that Sapph-Lit picked my book.
Oh my gosh, by a landslide, I tell you, by a landslide. Everyone wanted to read it, and it's been, one of the most talked about books that we've read for sure. So just so appreciate the time that you took to send me a book and, come chat with us, and we hope to have you back.
Thank you for having me. Thank you all for reading the book so closely and listening to me talk. This is really, really an honor. I really appreciate it.
Alrighty. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you online.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye, everyone.